All right, so we're going to look at subtracting decimal numbers now. We're going to look at two different examples, and we'll notice that subtracting decimal numbers is very similar to adding decimal numbers in how you set it up. But we'll notice that subtracting decimal numbers is also very similar to just subtracting whole numbers in general in how when we go through the process of actually subtracting after we set it up. Okay, so first off, we're going to go through example D first, and then go through example E. But first we need to set the problem up. We want to arrange the numbers in columns with the decimal point in a vertical line. This is identical to what we did with adding decimal numbers in the previous video. So we're subtracting 4.935 from 12.8. So 12.8 goes on top, and we're subtracting 4.935 from this. All right, so we lined up the decimals and each place. And notice that step two is actually provided in adding decimal numbers in the previous video, but it was optional when we were adding. But in this case, it's not an optional step. It's given as step two. So this is where we write these zeros so that both numbers have the same number of decimal places. So notice that there's three decimals here in the bottom number, so we need 3 decimals on top. Okay, and or decimal places. So now we're ready to subtract. Now you may realize when you think about the process of subtracting why the zeros are required, but if you don't realize at this point, you'll see in the end. And if you compare it to adding decimal numbers, you can really see why adding those zeros is really not required when you're adding, but subtracting it's most definitely required. Okay, now we need to subtract each column, and it's almost identical to what we would deal with whole numbers. Now we're going to be dealing with borrowing. You may be familiar with the borrowing process, borrowing from the placeholder to the left. But we do start from the right, and notice that similar to subtracting just whole numbers, you want to see if the number on top, compared to the number on bottom, is smaller. If the number on top is smaller, then we have to borrow from the number to the left. So notice that actually we have two numbers in a row. Or the first two comparisons, they're both smaller on top. So we actually have to borrow, actually no, 3 in a row. Okay, so we actually have to borrow 3 times in a row. So starting from the left, we would actually take 1 from here, and that becomes 18. And then from 18, we would then borrow 1, and this would become 10. And since we're borrowing 1 from the 18, this then becomes 17. And then we have to borrow 1 from here, and this would become 9, and then this would become 10. Okay, so we're ready to go. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 3 is 6. 17 minus 9 is 8. And 11 minus 4 is 7. So we have 7.865. And now, when I deal with this borrowing process, you may be familiar with how to subtract decimal number or whole numbers differently. You may not use this exact borrowing process. You may have your own process, but the most important thing is that is the setup. That's really what you need to focus on. That you may be less familiar with. You may have your own subtracting process once you have it all set up. When you deal with, similar to how you deal with whole numbers, so you don't exactly have to follow with what I did here, but hopefully you got the same result after using the stacking method. Let me know if you have any concerns with that. Example E, subtract 9.4 from 82.113. So let's change colors here. We have 82.113, and we're subtracting 9.4 from that. And so we need to add the decimals in there. All right, we're ready to subtract. 3 minus 0, the number is larger on top, so we have 3. 1 minus 0, 1. 1 minus 4, the number on top is smaller, so we have to borrow from over here. 1. And so this becomes 11. 11 minus 4 is 7. And then we have 1 minus 9. Oh, that's smaller, so we need to borrow from over here. Or if you realize, you can just take 81 and subtract 9 at this point. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we just have 72. So 72.713. And realize that you want to focus on what the question's asking. If the question asks you to round to a certain decimal place, make sure you round to that decimal place. I'm not going to focus on that right now. You may, since both these questions didn't even ask for that, but do whatever the question asks, round to appropriate amount of decimal places, and you'll be good. All right, let me know if you have any concerns.